The rehearsal ran long. It was October 1991, a Tuesday, and the Heartbreakers had been at it since noon in a studio space in Burbank that Tom Petty had used for years. The session was productive in the way that sessions are productive when everyone in the room knows their part and the question is not whether the music will work, but how much work it will take to get there. The Heartbreakers were one of the most practiced bands in rock music. They did not stumble. They refined. They broke at 7. Someone had brought food. There were beers. The conversation loosened in the way it loosened after a long rehearsal, moving from the specific business of the session into the broader territory of music in general. The kind of talk that happened in rooms like this, among people who had been playing together long enough that they could say what they actually thought. Someone mentioned Nirvana. Nevermind had been out for a month. It was everywhere. On the radio, in the conversation, in the particular agitation of the music press that signals something has shifted in a way that cannot be easily categorized or dismissed. The record was reaching people in large numbers and with a speed that surprised everyone, including, apparently, the label. Tom Petty was 41 years old. He had been making records since the mid-70s. He had watched movements come and go: punk, new wave, hair metal, the various upheavals that had periodically rewritten the terms of what rock music was supposed to look like. And he had survived all of them by being stubbornly, specifically himself. He made records with melody and craft and songs that were built to last, and he did not chase what was happening, and he did not run from it. He simply continued. He had heard Nevermind. He had formed a view. Craft, he said, to no one in particular, setting down his beer. That's what goes first. Every time something like this happens, craft is what gets sacrificed. The room listened. When Tom Petty spoke about music in this register, deliberate, slightly flat, the register of a man stating what he considered obvious, people tended to listen. I'm not saying the kid can't play. I'm saying the whole thing is built on feeling like you can't play. Like the inability is the point. You strip the craft out and call it honesty. He shook his head. Nirvana killed the craft. Give it 2 years and every A&R man in Los Angeles will be signing bands that can't play on purpose. Nobody pushed back. These were musicians who valued craft. They nodded or said nothing. Tom Petty picked up his beer again. That's all I'm saying, he said. The evening moved on. The food was eaten. The conversation moved elsewhere. Tom Petty drove home through the Burbank night thinking about nothing in particular. He did not think about what he had said again for nearly 2 years. It was the spring of 1993. Tom Petty was in Seattle for a show. His own show, a stop on a tour that had been running for several weeks. The day before the performance, he had an afternoon free, which was unusual on tours of this length and was treated as a small gift, a window of ordinary time inside the sustained unreality of being on the road. His tour manager mentioned in passing that there was something happening that night at a venue in Capitol Hill. Not a concert exactly, more of an informal set, acoustic, the kind of thing that didn't get formally announced. The name attached to it was Kurt Cobain. Tom Petty said he'd think about it. He thought about it for approximately an hour and then told his tour manager he was going. He was not entirely sure why. He had not been seeking this out. He had not been carrying the conversation from the Burbank rehearsal room in any conscious way, had not been building towards some confrontation or reconsideration. But the opportunity presented itself, and he recognized in the presenting of it something that needed to be answered. He had said something in a room full of people he respected about a musician he had not actually seen perform. That was a specific kind of carelessness that he did not normally permit himself. He went to see. The venue was small, smaller than he expected, a room that held maybe 150 people, and it was not full. He arrived after the set had started, standing near the back with his tour manager, and the first thing he noticed was the quiet, not the absence of sound. Kurt was playing. There was sound, guitar, and voice, filling the room without amplification beyond what the room's own speakers provided at modest volume. The quiet he noticed was in the audience. 150 people who were not moving, not talking, not doing any of the things audiences did when they were waiting for something to become interesting. They were already there. Wherever the music was taking them, They were already there. Tom Petty stood near the back and listened. The song was one he didn't recognize. This was not unusual. He had not studied Nirvana's catalog with any particular attention, and the acoustic format stripped away the production markers that might have made a song identifiable. What he heard was the skeleton of it, the chord changes, the melody, the voice. He paid attention to the voice. He had been making music for 20 years and had spent much of that time thinking about what voices did and how they did it. He had one of rock music's more distinctive voices himself. Nasal, slightly worn at the edges, with a quality of persistence that suited the kind of songs he wrote. He understood voices from the inside. What Kurt Cobain's voice was doing was not what he had expected. He had expected, based on the records, based on what he had said in the rehearsal room, based on his general understanding of what grunge was, a voice that relied on volume and distortion and the emotional blunt force of noise to carry what it couldn't carry on its own. He had expected the absence of control to be the instrument. Without the noise, the voice was something else. It was not a trained voice. It would never be a trained voice. There were things it could not do, ranges it would not reach cleanly, the kind of technical limitations that a vocal coach would have identified in the first lesson and spent the following years correcting. But in the range where it lived, and it knew where it lived, which was itself a kind of discipline, it did something that Tom Petty had not been prepared for. It communicated, not performed communication, not the signaling of emotion through the technical apparatus of performance, which he knew how to do and did well and which was a legitimate and necessary skill. Something more direct than that. Something that moved from the person producing it to the people receiving it without the usual delay, without the gap that existed between even very good performers and their audiences. The gap in which the audience processed what it was receiving and decided whether to allow itself to be moved. There was no gap. The processing wasn't happening. The people in that room were simply receiving. Tom Petty stood near the back wall and felt, for the first time in a long time, slightly outside something. Not excluded. The music was not exclusive, was not aimed at a particular person or demographic or sensibility, but outside in the sense of recognizing that something was happening in that room that he had not previously understood, that his existing framework for understanding it was insufficient, and that the insufficiency was his own. Kurt played for 35 minutes. He said almost nothing between songs. A brief pause, a shift of position on the stool, the sound of fingers adjusting on the fretboard, and then the next song began. The audience moved with the pauses, settling, quieting, leaning slightly forward, readying themselves. Tom Petty watched this. He had been watching audiences for 2 decades. He knew what it meant when an audience moved like this. The specific quality of collective attention that could not be manufactured, that either existed or didn't, that was the only reliable measure of whether something was working. It was working. When the set ended, the applause was genuine and slightly stunned. Kurt stood from the stool, nodded once at the room, a nod that was not a bow, that communicated completion without performance, and walked off the stage. Tom Petty did not go backstage. He stood near the rear wall for a moment after the lights came up, watching the audience disperse, and then he walked out with his tour manager into the Seattle night. They walked for a block before either of them said anything. "Well," his tour manager said. "Yeah," Tom Petty said. That was the full conversation. He did not sleep well. He lay in the hotel room and thought about what he had said in the Burbank rehearsal room in October 1991. He reconstructed it as precisely as he could. Craft is what goes first. Nirvana killed the craft. He had been wrong. He could see that now, and seeing it had the specific quality of clarity that arrives when you have been wrong about something important and can no longer avoid knowing it. Not a comfortable clarity, the uncomfortable kind that requires something to be done with it. He had confused the aesthetic with the absence of something. He had looked at the deliberate roughness, the distortion, the apparent rejection of the technical refinements that he valued, and he had concluded that what was being rejected was craft itself. The discipline of the thing, the learned ability to do it with precision. But that was not what he had seen tonight. What he had seen tonight was craft, a different craft, not the craft of polish and refinement and the accumulated expertise of years of practice directed toward technical mastery. The craft of finding the exact sound for the exact feeling. The craft of knowing what your voice could do and writing songs that needed exactly that, and nothing more. The craft of communicating directly, without the protective layer of performance, which was the hardest craft of all and the one most easily mistaken for its absence. He had dismissed it as the absence of craft. It was a different craft. That was what he had missed. He lay in the hotel room and thought about the people he had said this to. His band, musicians he respected, who had heard him say it and had nodded or said nothing, which meant they had either agreed or deferred to his judgment, and he was not sure which was worse. He picked up the phone. He called his drummer first. It was early, not yet 7, and the drummer answered with the voice of someone who had been awake for a while. "I need to tell you something," Tom Petty said. He described the previous evening, the venue, the acoustic set, the 35 minutes, the audience. He described what he had heard in the voice and what he understood now that he had not understood before. He said that what he had told them in the rehearsal room in October 1991 was wrong. Not partially wrong, not wrong in a nuanced way that could be reframed with some qualification. Wrong. The drummer was quiet for a moment. "What changed?" he asked. "I actually went and listened," Tom Petty said. He called 2 more people from the band that morning. He said the same things each time. Not an elaborate apology, not a performance of humility, just the correction of the record, delivered directly, the way he would have wanted someone to correct his record if he had been the one hearing something secondhand. He told each of them, "I said Nirvana killed the craft. I was wrong about what I was seeing. I was looking at the surface and calling it the whole." Each of them received this in their own way. One said almost nothing. One said he'd thought Petty might come around. One said he'd gone to see Nirvana 6 months earlier and had been meaning to say something. Tom Petty told his tour manager about the calls. "Why?" the tour manager asked. Not critically, just asking. Tom Petty thought about this for a moment. "Because I said it out loud," he said. "In a room full of people. If you say something wrong out loud, you fix it out loud." He was asked about Nirvana in an interview in 2017, a music journalist revisiting the 90s for a retrospective piece. The journalist mentioned the grunge era and asked whether Petty had felt threatened by it. Tom Petty shook his head. "I said something stupid about it early on," he said. "I said it killed the craft. I was making a point about technique, about what I thought was being lost. I went and saw Kurt Cobain play acoustic in Seattle. I think it was 93, and I understood I was wrong." The journalist asked what he had understood. "That I'd been confusing my method with the only method," Tom Petty said. "I do a certain thing. I've done it a long time. I value it. And I looked at something that didn't look like my thing, and I called it lesser. That's a failure of listening. That's someone who's been doing the same thing long enough that they've started to think the thing is the definition." He paused. "The kid could write a song. That's the definition. Everything else is furniture." The journalist asked if he had ever met Kurt Cobain. "No," Tom Petty said. "He died not long after that. I didn't go backstage that night in Seattle. I should have." He looked past the journalist. "I would have told him that I'd said something ignorant and that hearing him changed my mind. That's a thing worth saying to someone." He was quiet for a moment. "Some things you don't get to say," he said. "You just carry them. The apology that matters is not the one made to the person who was wronged, though that one matters too, when it can be made. The apology that matters first is the one made to the people who were in the room when the wrong thing was said, who heard it and nodded or said nothing and maybe believed it." Tom Petty picked up the phone at 7 in the morning and made those calls. Not because anyone asked him to, because he had said something out loud and it was wrong, and the only way to correct something said out loud is to say the correction out loud too, in the same rooms, to the same people, without qualification.